Back again. One of my first experiences as a young person, independently, thinking independently about the arts, was had me downtown Denver, digging around through an old bookstore looking for something I could afford to buy. I wanted to buy a book on somebody, on some great painter. And the only thing I could afford was one of those tall paperbacks with Rembrandt's drawings in it. And so I did. I bought it, took it home, and I started looking at it, and I was totally chagrined. I mean, I thought, oh, man, what can you learn from that? I was looking at these claw marks, and there's everything about his way of working was so personal, I guess you could say, so sketchy in the most understated way. I mean, an eye, eyes would be crossed like this, and the nose would be a gash down like this. I had no idea what a thumbnail was, and I mean, almost virtually all those drawings are thumbnails. None of them are studies from life or anything like that. I don't know what I was expecting, but I remember putting that book aside after a while, not having a clue what to do with it. So somebody, Kate, though, asked me in honor of, let me just read the question. Could you please comment on a contemporary of Velasquez, Rembrandt, especially given this year is the 350th anniversary of his death, and any influence he too may have had on the Impressionist approach to painting, especially in his later years? I love Rembrandt's treatment of light and his ability to convey emotion. And that's Kate. I appreciate the question. I'm not inclined to, simply sit around and act like some authority on these guys, but I do like talking about, how I think about them and how I use their influence, or how I might have been influenced by them in some way or another, or just in general what I think of them. But again, I don't have any interest in doing scholarly conversation on the subject. So, and I don't think that's what anybody wants me to do either. So I'm coming from the point of view, of course, of a person who loves light and was trained rather as the Boston School thinking, with a kind of a love of light, which I said, with a kind of an orientation around the light. I didn't get that from the Boston School. I actually was introduced to that by Brackman at the Art Students League. And I think I've said before, I mean, it all happened as we were standing around one day in a room. We'd all been pecking away like good impressionists, trying to get the ensemble of the color notes right. And he dragged us over to a painting by one of a couple Chinese guys that we all knew, and who had been there longer than I by a lot. And he said, finally, and he points out at one of them, finally, someone's painting the light. And we really didn't know what that meant. I'm not sure what he had said about what that meant before, but he pointed down there, and they're flickering out of this dark, paint was truly something that felt like light. And I've sort of never been the same since. And I mention that because Rembrandt is always doing that. He's persistently a part of the light. He's about painting the light. Gamble said that all great painters love the light, but most of the great painters are not oriented around it. And in other words, they don't take it as their métier. Of course, they don't hate light, and they try to paint things with light. But one of the reasons that academic drawing has the reputation it has is because it doesn't do that. Because it actually is about objects. I would rather say at the expense of light. Well, Rembrandt is this other guy, and we don't know where he came from. In a sense, I mean, you can see that his early paintings are so strange. I mean, I can't even categorize them. Looking around the era, I can't even categorize who would have ever told him to paint that way, And I'm talking about the Blind Tobit, that one with the sheep, or a number of those with very liney, very curious stuff. But the difference between that work, and in fact, some of the way he teaches, some of these students of his, Fabricius and others, their work is so weird. You wonder what they were doing. You wonder what they were thinking about. And I'm not going to show their work, but you can look that up. But I'm going to talk about Rembrandt, and I decided to do it in two blocks. One's this week, and I'll probably do another one another week or something, but I won't do them consecutively. But I wanted to talk about Rembrandt, sort of the man, and because her last point here is I love Rembrandt's treatment of light and his ability to convey emotion. And this last point here, the ability to convey emotion, I don't know if anybody in the history of painting does it better. Uh, and and I'm talking about, for example, Millet, who really is good and very much the same sort of way of working as well, working largely out of the imagination, making faces up, making gestures up, and finding that emotive pose or that right treatment of a face to make you actually empathize with the viewer. But I'm just going to walk you through the one thing that he's rather famous for. I'll just walk you through a bunch of his self-portraits where you can see that and where you can see the light. And next time we'll talk about the way he uses light for other things and the way he creates what I'm nearly metaphoric pictures, but very, very powerful expressions of either ideas or individuals. I'm talking about the paintings of anywhere from the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ, resurrection of Lazarus, to the Emmaus moment where the disciples recognize their master, suddenly recognize him, like his brilliant light goes off in the room, to the philosopher ones, the scholar, those kinds of paintings. They're just really fascinating, and they're particularly fascinating with their use of light. So, if you want to say, the Boston School, and I usually talk about the other guys I've talked about, Chardin, Velasquez, and Vermeer, because they were the ones that the Boston School guys talked about. They're the ones that they held up as models. Rembrandt's a tougher one to hold up because so much of his work is essentially brown, and it's working in a different way. There's an awful lot of, I don't know what you want to call this, messing with paint. That's different. It's, in one sense, slightly more indirect. It's also considerably more, I don't know if the right word is imaginative in its treatment of even a portrait. And I want to be careful when I say something like that, but they didn't use him as a model. So I think it's in those categories primarily that they were, walking off and saying, let's talk about these guys. Let's talk about the guys to focus on. The guys, really about light and full color, and a way of painting that's direct. And but in any case, that was the model that they'd managed to each talk about. But let's take a look at Rembrandt here. So I'm laughing because every time I see these things, they tickle me. But to watch a guy walk himself through life, I don't know how many there are. There's somebody has tallied them. I don't know if there's 100 or more than 100 portraits. I'm sure there's a book out there on the Rembrandt self-portraits. But I'm always fascinated by these for a variety of reasons. One is they always convey a sense of mood, a tentativeness in one case or a boldness in another, a look of being beaten in one case and another one of being the boldest guy in town, like a powerhouse. Fascinating things, and the unity of the expression is just to be staggering. But so these three are wonderful examples, though, of this combination of expression and light. Here's classic chiaroscuro thinking, which certainly the Boston School people would have been proud to claim as their own. This whole idea of the lost and found, the areas around the eyes, for example, in that first one. But that's the light. Now again, these things have this look of every painting that you've even done that doesn't have any light in it. When you put it on the internet, it suddenly has light in it. So don't let me overstate this. On the other hand, but you can feel the orientation is around light. It's also in a rather significant visual sense around the edge and edge relationship, strikingly around those things. He's very aware of that, and he's really using it up. There are other things, like when he's doing an ear, sort of odd things, like sometimes when he's doing an ear or something, they look rather like they're not seen. And so there are different things that he's doing, but I thought these were nice examples of that, sort of featuring a light thing, which is, rather in a class, Vermeer class, right? And certainly Boston School. So here again, don't you feel the light each time? And it's very clear. It's almost like he's setting spotlights out here, in this, the light's coming over here. He does that over and over again. And you'll see that, of course, in the Descent from the Cross, for example, where it looks like there's literally a headlight up there to give them enough light to be able to remove Christ from the cross. And in this case here, you can see a rather a smoother treatment of paint. There are some other earlier studies paintings where layers of glaze have been removed, but it looks like just somebody who's ambitious, some restorer got a hold of it, or some other damage caused by some other damage, but where you can feel layers of the paint have been removed. Nevertheless, he's actually operating, without that later impasto, possibly with a little less. I don't know. I was going to say searching, but there's always a searching going on with this guy. Anyway, but it's just interesting. I'm trying to show these chronologically rather as I guess it's chronological. So he seems to be wearing his artist hat here in the same way. He seems to like wearing costumes. He puts himself in a fur in one moment, and in some other thing that looks like it's maybe a scholar's cape or something in the bigger one. Feather in the hat, the whole thing. just having some fun. As a feather, an even crazier version of the feather in the hat, the chain on the shoulder, which is sometimes you see that something like that in Holbein and others. But he must have had a collection of these costume things, and he dresses himself up a number of times. In this case, on the left, of course, there he's casting a shadow from his strange hat. So it's obviously he's into visual entertainment, amusement, shape amusement, and other things. As I said, his method seems at this point, in fact, I think all the way through, to be one that is heavy in glazing. And I haven't made a deep study of that because it's not the way I go. If I had been, if I had been inclined that way, I probably would have had this guy in front of me a lot. I know there are other New York painters, David Fell and others, who are strongly influenced by these guys, if not thinking of him as their master, as their primary sort of source. I've tried not to do that with anybody, including the Boston School, but you wind up there. Everybody winds up there a little bit in one place or another. So here he is getting in toward middle age, but again, you see that emphasis on light, particularly in this left one, and the gradation of light and all the rest. As I said, Da Vinci would have been proud of it. His drawing, as you can see in most of these, actually is very, it's between very, very literal in a way, but it's also very searched out. It doesn't feel formulaic. You're looking at some of the English painters, and I'm thinking particularly of Rembrandt, where the guy is just flat good, but he has a way of clawing on the shapes that actually is very predictable, and Rembrandt doesn't seem to want to do that. Seems to want to search out, and that's a Boston School way of acting, In fact, I'd say if anything, there's a certain look, and I'm not going to show that, that's rather similar between this and, say, the Judge that I show you so frequently by Tarbell. Again, you can find that I think online. If you can't, it's on one of my previous videos, or more than one of my previous videos. I think I also show it in the Velázquez, expression. I'm sorry, the Evolution of Impressionism series, and the one on Velázquez. But you can look at it there. But you can see what I mean. And but it's got a tremendous sense of form. He's laughed at. There's a book by Fromentin called Masters of Past Time, and it's about the Dutch masters. And Fromentin was a French novelist who became a painter. And rather, in some senses, he paints like this. It's imaginative painting. It's strongly memory-based stuff. So he's got something in common, and the look is actually a little similar. At least as best I can tell, without having actually many of those pictures in front of me to compare. But he among other things, he has an approach to these different painters that is a little humanizing, I guess would be the right word, but at least he knocks them off their throne a little bit. But he always laughs, or he describes with laughing for example, the anatomy errors in the anatomy lesson of Dr. Tulp, if I remember that book right. but that was one of those things that Rembrandt would sit there and search all this stuff out in relation to himself, and might, because of the searching modality, make what you think of as an error or be off in some way. I love that Tarbell said once, by the way, that I don't trust a painter when you can't see where he went a little wrong. I wonder what he does mean by that, right? But that would indicate, though, that you put yourself in the place of having to search this out, and it's going to be a struggle. There's going to be a lot of work of this to this and that to that, and understanding and searching and seeking and playing through, trying this, trial and error. And I used to say about my own painting, I don't even think of it as trial and error. I think of it as error and error. And it's a pretty fair way to laugh at yourself, I think. So here he is, and again, getting a little bit older, but again, is not the effort to describe, again on this left one, the light, rather, and in a sense, this would be fitting if Gamel's right, saying that the subject of the Boston School painter is the light. You'd have a tough time arguing that, except for this guy's orientation around personal expression. About around the sensibility, the sensitivity that he feels. You feel that he's drawing forth, or that he's that the sitter is emoting, and that capacity is amazing. Again, you'll find over and over again he'll do things. This one's funny because he buried the hand, but so often the hands are so crudely drawn. I've always been stunned by that. I mean, how many times you find the hand? It's just like this claw of stuff. Later on, we'll talk about his way of working. That seems to be the modality. Is to claw some stuff on there and just start improving it. So his sense of that, the Benson idea that painting is repainting, or that it's the art of adjusting. He takes that to in some of those areas. It looks like he's taking that to the ridiculous extreme. Just clawing any crap out there, and because he can take care of it and put it back where it belongs and manage from there. But there's something very, very interesting about that, because if you're an eye person, that's what you want. You want to put something out there and let it start talking. And you say, no, more of this. It needs more of that to this and that more. And you do so. You have something to begin your relational search with. And that's standard stuff, right? And if you're all over the place at once, that's if you're really doing an honest search, and not just a mechanical, I hate to say copying, but there's a difference between understanding and copying. And searching implies searching till you get it, till you own it, as opposed to a mechanical process of any kind, traced photographs and all those things. So, and there again, there are a number of pictures that Rembrandt did where he's doing a little Trump thing, where he's trying to make himself look like he's coming out of the frame. I'm not sure that that's what this one is, but it does fit into that category. The curious shapes, that was not unusual for the Dutch to do a rondelle or an arch or an oval, or et cetera, et cetera. I don't know that much to say more about these things. The orientation toward brown, as I said, he appears to have had a brown studio, so you could argue that why not? It's interesting too. There was this long discussion from the Boston School about Velázquez, and somebody commented. I'm trying to remember who, but I don't know if it was one of our guys or somebody significantly earlier who said basically that Velázquez is the only person who's painted skin as cool as it was, and he's talking about as cool as it is in North Light. And Rembrandt definitely sort of flunks that test. He definitely is oriented much toward the warm. His pictures tend toward the warm. In fact, I don't know if I could think of one that isn't warm. I wonder sometimes if that isn't sort of I'm probably wrong, because I'm thinking of Maxfield Parrish, but I was wondering if that might not be a factor. That can't be the case. I was trying to think if that was a factor in Glaz's pictures, but I'm not anybody's glaze master, so I wouldn't be able to tell you. So he's getting older. His jacket here is rather fascinating. It looks like it's in rags. And I guess that was an era where that was frankly what was happening to him. And the sense of concern in his face. Again, look down at the clawed-in hands. I'm always, so I guess is not impressed by what is that he's doing there. But I think it suggests a methodology that's really quite crude, and he just decides to leave them in the shadows, which means don't work on them much anymore. One of the things I like about the way that you see the thinking in the Boston School is that if you have any indication of something at all, there's a certain amount of drawing sort of requisite. And our kind of drawing, as opposed to making hands and clawing out the lines between the fingers and that sort of thing, would be just simply the visual impression of the art. That's much more the Velázquez model. And that does change a bit here. With this is very much a different way of thinking. This to me reminds me an awful lot of construction drawing, sort of the inevitable crudeness involved in construction drawing, until you push all the parts significantly, individually, quite a bit further. But as I said, the lay-in of a Boston School way of thinking, at least the way I interpret it, and the way you can see it in the starts, is that even if there's any drawing at all, say around that lower hand, here or with a finger and all that sort of stuff. If there's any drawing at all, then if you're doing it, if you're making a silhouette that makes a rather, I'm sorry, if you're making value contrasts that make rather a silhouette or a shape, that you do play the relationships as you see them. But yeah, Rembrandt, one of the things you'd have to say about Rembrandt, if you said nothing else, is that he seems to be in his own world when it comes to painting. There doesn't seem to be anybody around him. Much like Vermeer, there's virtually nobody around him painting like that, Again, I do recommend you read Masters of Past Time by Fromentin, and that's a fascinating analysis by a painter of Rembrandt, and also of Rubens and Franz Hals, I believe, and the other guys. To me, the painting on the right, I'm going to see if I can, I'm not sure I can, but I'm going to try to blow this up for us. It doesn't do it on my screen. But that one on the right is like the culminating portrait. It's like the grand moment. And it's like it's somewhere between a statement of power and yet one of like a soldier, or like the gladiator who's been out there and massively injured, but he's still there, and he's still got it, whatever that is. But there's something about that head. There's the Richard Burton one by Leighton is rather similar to me in certain ways. The strength of, if you want to call it that, manhood thing. And of course that would go nicely with his the roughness of his, et cetera, et cetera. But lower to the left again, look at the hands and wonder, with me about what he was doing. It's as curious, and I'm not going to analyze it because I'm not trying to figure out how he painted, but you can. I mean, it's just curious. What was he thinking? You'll even find certain marks around like this, where they seem to be expressing almost nothing. I mean, you could figure out what it is, but there's a certain lack of the visual order going on there, and he seems to have to push to the next level and the next one to actually bring that, which he really does bring. Believe me, when he takes the head and starts pushing it, he's brilliantly in the visual order as we think of it. The eye on the right side here, this massive lost and found thing that's so Velázquez-like, very much visual. This guy's a visual painter. Meldrum talks about him, and I don't honestly get what he's talking about, except unless he means the earliest days, and I'm talking about the pre-early days, the primitives in the other guy's studio, whatever that was, because I see his orientation around light and effects there right away in the earliest pictures, and of truthfulness of the relationships of phenomenon. So I'm not sure what, but again, these would give you a sense. Again, I point the hands and the astonishing crudeness of them in certain ways. And there's a certain way he has of handling a lot of things where you feel like this guy, what is this guy? It reminds me so much of what I saw when I first saw his drawings. I thought, how is that helpful? So again, you can see his way of working, and again, it shows up in some of the other ones. Probably he's the only guy on the face of the earth could have actually drawn something forth from that staggering sort of, I don't know what you'd call that. But without, but that's the way it impresses me. And by the way, and I would say this, I mean, somebody wants to say again that you're jealous of all these guys. We take things from everybody, but I think it's wise to look at guys for when they're good and to wonder about it what is that, because all of us have it. And there's a funny statement once that you typically, what is it about students who typically grab the worst mannerisms of their teachers? Well, that means teachers have worse mannerisms, right? So or worst qualities, But his way of working is something is so astonishingly crude and so very non-visual. At the same time, he's got a great eye. So what is that? So I only ask it. I'm not here to critique such a brilliant painter, and I'm going to celebrate him some more in the next one. We'll end with these last three here. And in the two left ones, he's wearing this hat that I'm betting is on him just to keep him flat warm, but and probably what might be a very cold studio. I was going to point down at the palette over there and say, look, he's using my palette. Look at that. But actually, I can't. I would be making that up, of course. But but there it is again. I mean, there's this overall sense that he cares about the light. In this case here, the domination or the strength of the light behind him, strength here. But so let's stop at that. Let's just celebrate Rembrandt and the fact that even some of us get a certain amount of information straight up and early. Some people seem to get less quality information, but you have a lifetime to actually evolve and to bring forth great things, and I do mean good things, and I'm talking about, in this case, truth. And in so many levels, the truth that we observe in Rembrandt is that emotive truth of expression in the human face. It's definitely something to celebrate as part of that portion of painting that you hear me frequently rather underplaying. And it's not that it's in any way my suggestion that all you have to do is get the color right. I think that the Meldrum suggests that, and all you got to get the values right and all that sort of stuff. I think there's more. If you're going to put a head out there, you really have some obligations to actually express. And so this guy's a wonderful example of it, and it just goes into the smallest details of some of his lithographs and that sort of thing too. So on that note, I'm going to get out of here. Don't forget to subscribe, like, comment, and all the rest. Share, please. And thank you very much. Next time, not too far from now, we'll do Rembrandt again.